If anyone can show me one example in the history of the world of a single psychic who's been able to prove under reasonable experimental conditions that they are able to read minds. And if anyone can show me one example in the history of the world of a single astrologer who's been able to prove under reasonable experimental conditions that they can predict future human events by interpreting celestial signs. And if anyone can show me one example in the history of the world of a single homeopathic practitioner who's been able to prove under reasonable experimental conditions that solutions made up of infinitely tiny particles of good stuff dissolved repeatedly into relatively huge quantities of water have a consistently higher medicinal value than a similarly administered placebo. And if anyone can show me one example in the history of the world of a single spiritual person who's been able to show either empirically or logically the existence of a higher power with any consciousness or interest in the human race, or ability to punish or reward humans for their moral choices, or that there is any reason other than fear to believe in any version of an afterlife, I will give you my piano, one of my legs, and my wife.
Hello, and welcome to Reason.
Hello again. Third time's the charm, technical difficulties aside. Hello, and welcome to Reason. Today is Sunday, December 4th. And technical difficulties continue on. Today is Sunday, January 1st, 2012.
Oh, I didn't change that, did I?
No, you didn't.
Okay, that was my fault.
And this episode is entitled, Only 50 Weeks and 4 Days Until the Mayan End of the World Fun. I'd start stocking up on supplies now. I'm Joshua Billingsley, along with Paul Whitmire, and this podcast is coming to you, obviously, live from sunny Buffalo, New York. Reason Podcast is a weekly discussion of events, current and historical, from a skeptical, rational, and non-theological perspective. Reason Podcast is brought to you by the Offensive Atheists and the atheist community of Buffalo and Western New York. For further information, please visit our blog and website at wnyatheist.org, or you can email us at reason@wnyatheist.org. To promote prosperity, creativity, entrepreneurship, and innovation by combating the theft of U.S. property and other purposes, that's SOPA. That's H.R. 3261, sponsored by Representative Lamar Smith, Republican from Texas, and 12 bipartisan co-sponsors. This is the current bill, which is going to be up for a vote in January. It's called SOPA. There's a similar untimely named.
Yeah, it's got a U and a P or something like that.
No, the one in the one that's the congressional bill for SOPA. Mm-hmm. The Senate bill is PIPA. Yes, Protect IP Act, PIPA. So SOPA's definitely better. So we'll give one to the Congress for that.
SOPA, PIPA.
Yep.
Yeah. So it was like I think January 20th or 22nd. They were actually bringing this to a vote.
Yes, indeed. And this is what sort of spawned our entire show this week. We're going to be looking at censorship. Censorship, large, small, and in between.
And the ability of our sound equipment to censor ourselves.
Exactly. So these things happen. It throws us off our game, but that's okay. We're coming back strong. We're coming back in the second inning here. SOPA, for anyone who doesn't know, is a bill put in front of the House of Representatives in an effort to curb online piracy.
Yes, the scourge of file stealing and whatnot.
Well, truth be told, this is some legislation that will, in one shape or another, come to pass.
It's going to have to.
It will. They started restricting books once copyright law actually took into effect. Once the printing press came out, it took them a century or more. Then they started, getting into copyright law, that sort of thing. The same thing is going to be true for the internet. The exponential growth of the internet has sort of sped this along quite a bit. Mm-hmm. SOPA is, well, if you look at the internet, SOPA is the worst thing to happen in the history of human events, and it will deprive us all of our freedom, our liberty, and put us all in shackles.
That does seem to make sense. There is quite an uproar about it.
Yeah. Some people say it will change the nature and the shape of the internet forever, permanently, and unchangingly. Well, there's a lot of doomsaying out there.
Yeah.
Truth be told, most of it is not true.
Okay.
There's some fairly specific things that SOPA or PIPA, which I think maybe I'm going to go with PIPA because it just makes me fun. It makes me think of Pippin. Yeah, I'm a dork.
Yeah, everyone loves Pippin. Oh my god.
SOPA is the proposed bill would allow the U.S. Department of Justice, as well as copyright holders, to seek court orders against websites accused of enabling or facilitating copyright infringement. Now, depending on who requests the court orders, the actions could include barring online advertising networks and payment facilitators like your PayPals from doing business with the infringing website, barring search engines from linking to the sites, and requiring internet service providers to block access to such sites. Mm-hmm. So it's pretty wide open. And the idea behind the bill itself is going to happen. There's nothing to stop that. The bill would make unauthorized streaming of copyrighted content a crime with a maximum penalty of 5 years in prison for 10 pieces of music or movies within 6 months. There is virtually no description of what a piece is. Mm-hmm. That's one of the problems, and that's actually one of the basic problems that comes across in all of the SOPA legislation. It's a 78-page bill. Mm-hmm. It's fairly menacing.
Well, you went through a lot of this, mm-hmm. and I did not. I just am left with the what the folks been saying on the intronets and what we're supposed to be concerned about and all of that. So, from my perspective, what I'm assuming is true, what I've heard, mm-hmm. and you can tell me if these are correct or not. The SOPA would give some sort of regulating body the ability to completely block IP addresses and basically shut down websites if even a small number of copyright infringed materials were present on there, which would in effect allow this organization to just censor, to just block this URL, shut this site down, make Time Warner Cable they could keep any Time Warner Cable customer from accessing any specific URL or something like Pirate Bay or something like that. Would that be an accurate description, or am I way off base here?
Well, you're not way off base. Basically, what can happen is they can cut you off in one way or another, mm-hmm. if you have copyrighted material. You have a few days to make the correction to get rid of it, but initially you can be, depending on the court order, you can be immediately cut off pending your correction. Mm-hmm. This is not entirely a bad thing.
Okay.
It does restrict copyright infringement. But yeah, they can basically do almost all of that. Now keep in mind, this does not apply to .com or .org sites. Those are American. Those are already, I see you making the funny face at me. Wait.
All right, I'm listening.
Those are already being restricted as of 2010. So they've already got a quantity of legislation that applies to them. Mm-hmm. Now, the big catch that isn't directly mentioned in here is that if Facebook, for instance, Facebook is a .com, mm-hmm. so they are for profit, they're doing their thing, and they're an American company. They're already being restricted by American law. Now, people can put things onto Facebook from other countries.
Yeah, it's worldwide.
Right. The problem with that is that as soon as they do that, mm-hmm. the law applies to Facebook. So while technically,
SOPA does.
Yes, SOPA.
Okay.
While technically they can't do that, American laws that are already in place already govern that. Mm. Once any international business goes through, mm-hmm. so another country puts that in there, at that point, it's immediately all of Facebook is eligible for this law. And this law is much more draconian. The old law, you had a certain period of time where you could review it, you could cut them off, you could contest it, you could do any number of these things. Under SOPA, you more or less, they can cut you off immediately. Mm-hmm. The biggest problem with this isn't the idea of what they're doing, because what they're doing is not that bad. And that's the reason that it took me actually getting the bill and reading through the bill to find out what the problems are, is that the problems are not immediately evident.
Okay.
I know Adam Savage Mythbusters guy.
Yes.
Adam Savage has a bit of a thing where he dogs it, and I've read through a lot of people that I respect, and the problem is that no one really says what's wrong with it because it's complicated. It's complicated because you have to posit certain scenarios. Right now, and I don't think this is through any malice by the Congress. I think they just didn't think about it.
Well, they're not computer guys.
Well, okay. Well, they're not.
Jesus.
They're not a lot of things. For instance, let's imagine that we lived in a country that was going to have a Twitter revolution.
Okay.
Now, a straightforward reading of this law says that if there is a Twitter listing, if I, on my Twitter account, refer to a page that has copyrighted material, you can get a court order to shut down Twitter. Temporarily.
Right.
Temporarily. Of course, if you're planning to have an Occupy Wall Street demonstration that's being orchestrated through Twitter,
right,
I can shut you down at least long enough to end that.
And what sort of, it probably doesn't go into much detail on this, even though it's 78 pages, but what sort of prima facie case do you need to have to
you don't need any.
You don't need anything.
That's one of the big problems with it, is that the requirements are incredibly vague. So a good judge might have very strict requirements. A more, you'll pardon me, liberal judge, and by that I mean a judge with a more liberal interpretation of it, would, have a totally different set of restrictions. It's wide open and without any precedent, because no precedent applies to this. There's not even a law similar they can reference over to steal some of the precedent from another law that's kind of similar.
Right.
There's none of that. This is brand new, and it is so vague that it does. I mean, all the horror stories you hear, while they're not likely, by the wording of this law, they are kind of possible.
Right, and this is I actually haven't heard this avenue of complaint regarding SOPA. Everyone does just take, it's going to break the internet. The internet's going to be broken. But I think the truth really comes out to be, this is one of the problems similar to the Patriot Act, which is it's 78 pages and vague and gives kind of broad sweeping authority, and that's concerning, not for what its intention is, but for what it may be used for in the future.
Right, the powers are wide open. They're incredibly wide. And, okay, for instance, doomsday scenario. A doomsday scenario is something along the lines of they could shut down YouTube almost completely. Period.
Yeah.
And any similar site, shut down completely. Facebook, they could shut it down completely. Period. Without really, I mean, there are any number of violations on your page, my page, the Reason Podcast page, every friend that I have's page, everyone all over the place. There's sufficient. So you want to look for what is it, 10 violations you need?
Yeah, I probably
10
have those.
pieces of streaming or copyrighted content.
I probably have those this week.
Yeah, so it could easily be shut down. Now, the biggest problem with this is going to be that to avoid the incredible loss of revenue, you're going to have to police that yourself. Which means that another thing. The problem, this is just by way of explanation. If you think about the problem with affirmative action, is that affirmative action in theory is fantastic. In practice, is a terrible idea. They end up with your token this and your token that, and this is all not because of the laws or the regulations. It's all because of protectionism. The company is trying to protect itself preemptively, so they hire a black guy. They hire a black guy, so now they can't be sued for discrimination later on. Well, much the same way, it's going to be the overreaction of a corporate entity.
Right. The websites, the corporations behind the websites are going to just completely block anything that could even be suspect, even if it's clear. Like they're going to, it's possible that they could not demand you to follow up and make sure you're not publishing copyrighted material, but to actually affirmatively prove that you are the copyright holder or that there is no copyright on it, which would limit your ability to publish things.
Yes, and it would slow that down tremendously. So I've been trying to find a silver bullet that's easy for everyone to understand the problem. It's not that simple, and that's the problem with 78 pages of legislation.
Right.
They've got floating definitions, unclear definitions, and it's self-referential, as all laws tend to be. They're written that way to be really annoying. Anybody who's ever read laws knows that Section C references directly the same language as subsection B1, B2, and B3, but excludes B4 and B5. That's sort of the way that it's done, and it's done that way, I think, to keep lawyers employed.
Well, they need jobs because they don't have much skill elsewhere.
There's a lot of lawyers. But it's generally the confusing and the lack of specificity. Mm-hmm. Now, there's been a couple of people that have openly spoken about this. There's the end of the world scenario that has been proposed, and I don't mean that it will cause devastation. I mean that a lot of people, like there's been memos that have been leaked from your Googles and your Facebooks that say if the law goes into effect, we're shutting it down. We will shut down our company.
So they're going to shut down the internet.
Basically, yes. And I think that's, again, they're leaking the memos because they're trying to scare people into thinking that would be the case. Mm-hmm. And of course it won't. It'll be preposterous. But it's something that would cause a tremendous loss of revenue in the internet. I mean, it would bring internet revenue to a screeching halt. It would in fact change the nature of the internet drastically.
You know what else it might do? It has the possibility of decentralizing, or at least exporting the internet. If a lot
because the internet's an American phenomenon. I mean,
well, it is.
We own the internet. The internet is America.
And if the internet decides to go elsewhere, and to not be bound by these laws or restrictions. I mean, Facebook has an American presence. They're an American company. Mm-hmm. Okay, they could very easily just move to Europe. Mm-hmm. And it may not necessarily change too much in terms of the average American or worldwide users' usage. But it would take jobs away from America. It would decentralize. America's been at the forefront of this development of the information age, and it is a bit doomsday for me to say, kind of going into this, that it could tip that over, and America could lose our dominance in that area. But it's stuff like this that may cause that to happen.
My biggest problem with this bill in general is that I don't think it accomplishes what it's trying to do.
Okay.
Even if you take it at face value, it's trying to stop online piracy. Take something like the Pirate Bay, where you can you steal stuff off the internet.
Yep.
You can do that. The fact of the matter is, though, the Pirate Bay can simply shut down, change its IP address, and start back up immediately. Mm-hmm. And it has to get caught again. Then it can shut down. And as long as it's doing it from Taiwan or China, mm-hmm. it can do that indefinitely. There's nothing stopping that from happening because there is no international law that would govern that. So the fact of the matter is, it will just create a better breed of pirate.
Yeah, like a lot of this stuff does.
But I mean, this is fairly wide open. In the space of about 3 or 4 minutes, I, who have no computer savvy whatsoever, thought of a way to do it. I mean, it's fairly clear the number of huge flaws, and the fact of the matter is, it does restrict, and it is a little paranoid to say that it's usable in any number of ways by the man, mm-hmm. but it is. Whistleblower. A whistleblower is communicating and puts something up on their whistleblower blog. Your Drudge reports, something that I know everyone is familiar with, Snopes.
Okay.
Snopes decides to attack the efficacy of a drug.
Sure.
They do that. Now, you know what? I bet you Snopes has copyrighted material. Be it a picture, something taken out that's not properly referenced. I could find, and if I'm wrong, whoops. Yeah. But I can shut you down.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure
for
I've seen
long enough.
Like Coke logos on there, different companies and manufacturers logos on there when they're doing their article. Now there's fair use, but that's an argument.
Yep, and then you have to put it in front of a judge, which takes time.
Yeah.
So you can shut it down temporarily, and all you need is a lawyer. One lawyer to sit there and look at that page, look at every single thing. It doesn't even have to be on the internet anymore. It can be something that was on the internet.
Right.
So it's got tremendous far-reaching power, and it's incredibly frightening the amount of pull, authority, mm-hmm. the clout that you would have simply by accusing someone. Mm-hmm. It's the accusation that's important. And again, we all know that it's a question of legal loopholes.
Yeah.
That corporate entities will find legal loopholes. And 78-page bill that says what could be said in a 3-page bill is nothing but loopholes all over the place, everywhere.
Which means that the corporations and the large organizations with money are going to be able to be the ones who are able to find the loopholes. And in the end, what we'll do, yet again, is hurt the smaller startup kind of aspect of that. It's going to be a lot harder to start a YouTube-like idea or something like that.
Yes, I mean, the thing that scared me is the language does seem to include the fact that it could shut down Twitter because people on Twitter referenced something which was copyrighted, which is not actually on Twitter. That's the problem. So if I cite something, I link to something on my Facebook page, and you share it, and somebody else shares it, well, that's 3 right there.
Right.
And that's just one article, one item, and you've got millions and millions and millions of people doing this. It's too far-reaching, the power, and that's the problem, is that people are trying to make it doomsday-ish, because in a lot of ways it is, but not in a lot of clear ways.
Right.
It doesn't have a very clear-cut problem.
Well, we had a question from the chat room here, which is, you may be getting to this as you go through, but the question was, if SOPA passes end of January here, I mean, what are the immediate results going to be for the end user? Like, what is the average internet user going to experience after SOPA comes into effect?
Well, first off, SOPA does have to be united with PIPA, and they'd have to re-vote on that. But let's say the whole thing comes into effect. First off, you could be committing a crime, and the fact of the matter is, technically, there's language in there that says that posting online material that's not for economic gain. So you see a funny video on something and you put it on there.
Cats are funny.
I'm not sure that's particularly copyrighted. Let's say there is a copyrighted video of cats. Putting it on there, if you've done that a few times, you could be held accountable. And they say specifically, the representatives, that you should not be. This is for-profit entities only. Except that the law does not say that.
Yeah.
The intention of the law is that. The law does not say that. Which means that if I, as a corporate entity that is really mad at, Facebook, and you've put stuff on there, I will go after you, shut down Facebook, so of course succeed in my primary goal, but secondarily, you could be subject to 5 years in prison and a felony, simply because I was angry at Facebook and you happened to do something stupid. Because you would have to fight that. You'd have to get a lawyer to fight that. You could probably get the ACLU or somebody on board to help you come up with an attorney, but you've got a couple of year legal battle to take on this attack, simply, because of the vague language in the law. Not to mention, again, the shutting down of YouTube Facebook for everyone for that period of time. It's a fairly powerful piece of legislation, primarily because of its vagueness.
And that's a lot of the problems with stuff like this. So, whether, is it going to happen that this law passes, it goes through the Senate and it goes through the House and then it comes together again, they create a law, and then all of a sudden, next Tuesday, YouTube is gone? Probably not. But I think, like you were saying, Josh, this is something that in some way, shape, or form is going to have to happen. Because the advent of the internet has created a number of changes in the way we share media and the way someone can get paid for producing media.
Intellectual property is an incredibly large and probably the fastest growing area of law, because intellectual property is the fastest growing area of the economy.
Yeah.
We're building intellectual property, but we're doing that because of the internet. If you stifle that to protect it, you may end up stifling it, period. And, again, shifting it overseas.
And intellectual property was not intellectual property. When we talk about intellectual property, what we're talking about, what used to be a record that a band produced, an album, a painting, a picture. These are things that were tangible things that you could buy, sell, trade. And only because we've gotten rid of the medium. We've gotten rid of the compact disc. We've gotten rid of the cassette tape. Now it's just this ethereal file thing, which I don't have to lose by giving to you. I give you a piece of music. It doesn't mean I don't have it anymore.
Right. I used to be able to just play a song for you. You could hear it. That's nice. Now I can actually give you the song. So it's the exact same thing, just as if you had a completely photographic memory.
Right.
Or autographic memory?
Sure.
Yeah. And that's where it causes problems, because the laws are not written for this technology. They're not. So we do need a new breed of laws for intellectual property control.
Yeah, and as soon as all this came about, it was great. All of a sudden, late 90s, early 2000s, we came up with this system where, oh my God, I can get
Napster.
I can get any song I want. I can have this huge collection of music. I can store thousands and thousands of hours on something the size of, I don't know, like a tin of Altoids. I can store thousands and thousands of hours of music. Well, the laws didn't quite catch up with it, and one of the things that SOPA is trying to do is that to accomplish that now, to catch up for it. I mean, everyone gave Metallica a bunch of crap about when they sued over intellectual property. And they were kind of dicks about it, but they did have a point. If they make their living, and I'm not talking about Metallica needing the money, but Metallica was actually the entire time saying that they were being a proxy for bands who were,
right,
selling albums out of the trunk of their car. I mean, how can you make it in the music business if when you used to be able to sell an album and profit $5 off it, which gives you gas money to continue to be on tour, and now all of a sudden you sell one album for $5, people duplicate it 15,000 times and you receive no money. You need a different model at least. For the music industry in particular, but also, these laws seem to be trying to go back to making it the way it was, making it so that...
Yes, that's the biggest problem, I think, is that the people that are making the laws are trying to create it's this conservative ideal. It's like going back in time.
Right.
You can't go back in time. You need new laws. You can't go back to the way things were. Just as another point, I was going to mention this, but maybe I'll go into a little more detail. Latif Matima, director of the Institute for Intellectual Property and Social Justice at Howard University School of Law, says, perhaps the most and I can't speak now, technical difficulties, linguistic difficulties.
At least your mic's working.
That's true. Perhaps the most dangerous aspect of the bill is that the conduct it would criminalize is poorly defined. While on its face, the bill seems to attempt to distinguish between commercial and non-commercial conduct, purportedly criminalizing the former and permitting the latter, in actuality, the bill not only fails to accomplish this, but because of its lack of concrete definitions, it potentially criminalizes conduct that is currently permitted under law. So a lot of those the things which are actually fair use would no longer be, because the definitions in this bill are so wide open.
Right.
There are, in fact, pretty much every internet company that you're aware of has come out against this. I know GoDaddy originally supported SOPA.
Yeah.
That lasted a day.
Well, there was a whole thing about that, though. There's a lot more going on with GoDaddy than... so apparently, GoDaddy... I'm sorry, I'm kind of jumping in on you on this, but GoDaddy came out in favor of SOPA. And so what happened was there's a big whole stink made, and a lot of people who had their websites through GoDaddy decided to band together and leave.
Including Wikipedia.
Yes.
What's his name? Wales?
Yeah.
Wales was going to take Wikipedia and every Wikipedia entry that was GoDaddy away.
And so what happened was there are laws currently in place regarding you transferring your website. No web hosting company is allowed to hold your information, basically, when there is a request from another web hosting service for the information. They're required by law to give it to you. And this is basically what this means is I go to company B. I don't want to go through GoDaddy. So I go to company B and I say, ping GoDaddy, grab all my data and download it to your servers. I want to use you now. GoDaddy is required to give them that information.
Yeah.
GoDaddy, depending on whose perspective you're talking about, was preventing that information from going out. Now, all the users, all the people who had their websites on GoDaddy were saying that GoDaddy was preventing them from leaving. GoDaddy was saying it's not that we were preventing people from leaving. Our servers are set up to only do that 20,000 times a day or whatnot. It was just that you flooded us with quitting.
Yep.
And so, but either way, I mean, yeah, it's GoDaddy really suffered because a number of users decided that they wanted to leave.
A number of very big users.
And then on top of it, they had this whole problem with violating this regulation or law, whether it was simply that their servers couldn't handle it. The law says their servers are supposed to be able to handle it. Anytime your data is requested from another web hosting, they're supposed to give it.
But nobody believes that. It's the same problem with the run on the banks. Your bank doesn't have your money.
Right.
You can't all ask for it at the same time. It's just not feasible. We didn't anticipate this. So,
Yeah, so there's a question in the chat room, and it's come up a couple of times, and I want to just go before we move on from SOPA, because we're kind of deep in the midst of that. The question was, does SOPA just pertain to URLs and IP addresses, or does it also allow the blockage of ports that would shut down the sharing via something like torrents? Now, I'm more the torrent guy, and you're more the guy who did the research on SOPA. I can't answer this question. I don't know if you can or not.
It would actually shut down where you're getting the information from. You would no longer be connected. So the system you used to get new information via the page you use, the page that accumulates all the information and allows you to get it, it would shut them down.
Okay.
So all the stuff that you have, and if you want to give me stuff personally through some other route, you'd still be able to do that.
Right. So it's basically just shutting down the web page. It's shutting down your most
really
easy access point
Yes.
to. So it wouldn't eliminate torrents. What it would eliminate would be torrent search engines, for example. You'd have a harder time going to some place to search for a torrent of all the Fast and Furious movies if you decide you want to download all 5 or 6 or 7 of them at once.
Why you would want to do this, I have absolutely no idea.
Well, people like the cars.
Vin Diesel is bald.
Vin Diesel is bald.
And apparently that Walker fella, apparently he has pretty eyes.
He does have pretty eyes.
Doesn't do anything for me, but that's what I've heard.
So, all right.
I think that's about it. I mean,
Well,
I will just give you a few of the organizations that are pro SOPA, and tell me if you think that any of these have anything in common. For instance, NBC Universal, Pfizer, Ford Motor Company, Revlon, the NBA, and Macmillan. I don't actually know what Macmillan is. But there's also a lot of talk of making it so you can't get drugs from Canada.
Yeah.
That's one of the big things that this law allows is sites that sell you drugs of any kind. They're saying that they're only targeting ones that sell drugs illegally. So without a prescription, you want to get, Lortabs or
codeine is over the counter actually codeine is behind the counter in Canada, meaning you have to ask the pharmacist for it, but you don't need a prescription for it.
But the fact of the matter is, it would stop you from accessing the Canadian pages that actually allow you to use a prescription that has to be verified to get your drugs from Canada. So it would also prevent that, which is part of the reason that Pfizer has a problem with it. NBC Universal, they have a huge problem with it because their media, they don't own the internet. They haven't invested in it. They just don't own any. But they do have a lot of content.
Yeah.
Same idea as the NBA. I'm not sure what the problem with the Ford Motor Company is, but I'm sure it's something equally specific. There's a lot of people out there that stand to lose a lot of money if things keep going the way they are.
Yeah, and they have been losing a lot of money.
And they refuse to change the system. You've been sitting high on the hog. Sorry, you're going to get a much smaller share. If that requires a lot of smaller companies doing the job your one big mega company did, well, that's capitalism, man.
Yeah.
Sorry, innovation breeds innovation. So you need to innovate to keep up with the internet.
Yeah.
That's just the way that it goes. And I will say that good old Ron Paul, against SOPA.
All right.
He's come out firmly and strongly against SOPA because he's against regulation.
And women.
Well, unless it applies to a woman's body or the Mexicans.
Yeah, he doesn't like.
He hates the Mexicans and women's reproductive organs. But aside from that,
evolution.
Yeah. But aside from those three things, he is against regulation. So
All right. We're going to be talking more or less about SOPA and censorship for the rest of the show here. There's in one way or another. So one of the things that we're doing, this episode is on SOPA and censorship. I think towards the end of the year, as we're getting to the Christmas holiday, a lot of the websites and various media outlets that Josh and I peruse were discussing this SOPA thing, and he and I were going back and forth on, what does it mean? What are the implications? And so that's, why we wanted to kind of talk about it today. It's unfortunate that, in doing the research that we've done, the answers are really not any more clear.
We have absolutely no idea, except that it could do a lot of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's a concern. It's not the doomsday concern where again next Tuesday YouTube's gonna be gone. But the concern is it's gonna start a general trend of where the internet is going to ultimately go, because there's some problems with this loose and fast Wild West attitude that the internet's had since it started. There is no law, no regulations. Take this, steal that, give this to a person, and that probably can't continue in its current form. But again, this whole idea of going backwards in time and making it how it used to be isn't going to work either.
It's just not feasible. It's a new game. I'm sorry. If you made your fortune with the horse and buggy, sorry, you got to get on board with the automobile. Sorry, technology has done that to you, so you need to innovate.
Yeah, this would be, maybe the equivalent of saying, okay, well, we are not allowing the production of automobiles in America, and we're closing our borders to all automobile imports. The only thing that can be used in America is horse and buggy, and thinking that that's going to solve the problem. It's not.
Okay, just as another side note, Germany has some very restrictive. They don't have a First Amendment. Mm-hmm. They have very restrictive laws. For instance, you cannot use the word. You can't say Nazi. You can't have a swastika unless it's specifically for artistic intent. So you can't put it out there.
And there's very specific regulations on that.
And they're very specific. So imagine Germany deciding to enact a law like this. They could shut down they could shut down YouTube for having somebody with a swastika tattoo.
Yeah,
they would have the power to do that if they did that. So imagine. Our laws seem very at home to us. Imagine everybody else having this law as well. They'd be able to shut down international commerce like crazy. And if you think that won't happen, imagine the United States seeking dominion over the entire internet and force feeding it to everyone. They're going to do the same, and they're going to screw us.
Yeah,
it's just going to happen. I mean, It's not that far-fetched. That one is a very reasonable concern. Is
right.
One law like that in the European Union, and our internet freedom goes to crap.
This is true.
Not that I want people to have neo-Nazi tattoos or anything like that, but I would prefer that people have the right to have neo-Nazi tattoos.
Yeah, if people want to have neo-Nazi tattoos, go friggin' nuts.
Because there's a lot of things that I want to say that people don't like.
Yeah.
And I'll take an occasional skinhead so I can just delete him from my page or what have you. So
right, turn the channel. Mm-hmm. So it is our first show of the year, the first of the year. Here we are, January 1st, and although many of you out there are probably nursing your hangovers from the festivities last night and whatnot, we are taking callers again. We did take a week off from that, but we're kind of back in the swing. We don't expect to have a whole torrent and flood today because
certainly not BitTorrent.
Yes, the holidays and whatnot, but we will continue to take callers every week from now on. The number to call in is 424-243-9589. And if you have any comments, questions about SOPA, about censorship in general, we'd be happy to hear from you. Maybe you have some new perspective on it that Josh and I haven't considered. Maybe you think we're just flat out wrong and you want to fight us about it. That'd be a good time. All right, so if you do want to call in, we would be happy to have you. So. That being said, let's kind of move on to some of the things that have been in the news lately. The article that I wanted to address comes from PC World magazine. And, SOPA is making the noise. Censorship's becoming an issue. We're not really sure what's going to happen with the internet and blah, blah, blah. So this article from PC World is entitled, "Hackers Said to be Planning to Launch Own Satellites to Combat Censorship." And the reason why I wanted to discuss this article, which is a short and really, really lacking in information here, but regardless, this is exactly what Josh and I are talking about when we talk about you can't go backwards in time. The genie has come out of the bottle, okay? Hacking exists. People are going to find a way around firewalls. People are going to find a way around, copyright regulations and rules. And, this idea of putting satellites into space, maybe it is far-fetched right now. But it's, something, if enough people really want this to happen, it's going to happen. So it's called the Hackerspace Global Grid. And apparently a representative, hacker activist Nick Farr, said that knowledge is the only motive of this project in putting satellites into space. Now, you may think this is absolutely ridiculous. No hacker coalition organization is going to get satellites up into space. Well, they can. And the reason why they can, believe it or not, is with balloons. Balloons, not rocket ships, balloons.
All right.
And
all right.
the problem that they have with this is it's not like putting a satellite into orbit. When you put a satellite into orbit, its speed and position is very well known and accounted for and blah, blah, blah. They're putting satellites up there with balloons, and they're high enough so they're into the stratosphere. They're outside of the Earth. No country can lay claim to the airspace that they're floating in and whatnot. Right. They just don't have control over where they're going, and how they're behaving and things like that. So this hacker coalition is they've decided to kind of take a reverse global positioning system idea to try and track these satellites. GPS, the thing in your car, the thing that, gets you from point A to point B without a map, that whole thing. What that does is there's satellites up there in outer space, and you log on to, you connect with the satellites that are up there, and all they tell you one very, very simple thing. They tell you how far you are away from that satellite. The satellite knows where it is, and you send a signal to it, and the signal comes back, and the amount of time that it takes for that signal to travel gives you the exact distance that you are from that satellite. Well, when you do that to 4 different satellites in space, you now have
triangulation.
So, if I'm, 20 miles from that one, 18 miles from that one, 13 miles from this one, and 6 miles from that one, well, I can only be in this small little area. That's the only area that fulfills all those distances at the same time. So what these hackers are doing instead is putting basically land stations on the ground and having the satellite that's floating in the subspace basically do the exact same thing. Send a signal back down to the ground station saying you're 6 miles away from the ground station. If you do that to 3 or 4 different ground stations, you get a rough idea of where the satellite is. So they're developing this technology kind of back alley on the fly, and they're doing this as a way to, at some point in the future, get around any sort of government interference or regulation that's put in to information exchange. And that is, I wanted to discuss this article because it's the information, the idea that we've had a change in, the entire perspective has changed in America and through most of the world. Information now has become apparently a right. We feel that we have a right to information. This is, where WikiLeaks come from. Mm-hmm. This is where, Wikipedia, where there's this idea that the information, I should be able to have that information. No one should be allowed to keep me from that information.
Which is sort of the idea that our country's founded upon.
Mm-hmm.
We have a lot of freedom. You should have the right to have this. And the fact of the matter is, we've gotten used to having it in, 50 seconds to maybe 3 minutes. But that's about it. That's about how long it should take for me to get an answer to this question.
And this paradigm shift of us now having the information at our fingertips, I don't think you can put that genie back in the bottle. Like I was saying, I don't think we can go back to, I simply can't get the information anymore. All right, I'll deal with that. I don't think that's going to be the case. So we're going to find all these workarounds. People are going to be working on this. People who are more ambitious than I am about this sort of thing. Mm-hmm. But it's going to keep happening. So,
well, the fact of the matter is, it will keep happening if they're forced to.
Right.
This is something that does not need to happen. The government and the powers that be can still enforce some modicum of control as long as they realize it's a new game. It's a new paradigm.
Right, and I don't think they do yet.
Well, that's the problem. If they fight at 110%, you'll end up in this situation. This is the sort of thing that is going to push this kind of, innovation. Stumbling blocks breed innovation, and people that want to do this and now believe this is their right,
mm-hmm.
they will innovate. They will find a way to do it, and they'll get angrier and angrier. And, it will be self-destructive. This kind of legislation is self-destructive if it's too forceful.
Yeah. And, before I move on, I do want to, I did make somewhat of an error, and somebody called me on it in the chat room, which is nice, regarding whether or not a signal is actually transmitted from your GPS unit to the satellite. I don't think that is the case. I think, it is only, you're receiving information from the satellite. And I'm not an expert in how the GPS works, but hey, when I'm wrong, I'm wrong. What are you going to do?
Well, that's what I hear.
So, but it's still the triangulation idea. It's still information as to how far you are away from each one of the satellites that gives you the triangulation.
Mm-hmm.
So, but yes, satellites in space put up by hackers. That's what SOPA is going to lead to. If the Mayans don't blow us up first, then the world's going to be overtaken by satellite balloons and anonymous.
Hey, I've actually got something completely off topic, but you raised it, and I think it's a solid point.
Okay.
I believe the Mayans, the ancient astronaut theory,
Sure.
that the
Yeah, you
ancient
talked
people,
about that.
ancient people had all sorts of advanced technology we don't understand. I'm pretty sure the Mayans put an ancient astronaut bomb under the Earth, and it will go off at the end of the Mayan calendar. I think the Mayans will blow us all up.
Why did the Mayans want to blow everything up when they ran out of space on the calendar?
They were religious fanatics.
Oh, yeah, that does actually excuse any number of behaviors.
It really does.
Oh, religious fanatics? I got it. Oh, I thought, but you killed all those people in that city, and you took it and claimed it as your own. Well, but God.
Simple as that.
Yeah. Okay, so Josh, you had a news article which is
yes,
interesting to me. In fact, I would have talked about it. I would have grabbed it if you hadn't grabbed it first. But what do you got there?
Sydney Morning Herald.
Sydney, Australia.
Sydney, Australia.
Okay.
December 26, 2011. Censorship of science is acceptable when lives are at stake. Now,
Okay.
this article is talking about the research that's been done on bird flu. They've done a lot of research on bird flu, trying to figure out what it is, how it comes about. They've tweaked it. They've found out how easy it would be to jump to mammals, for instance. I believe they did on weasels or ferrets. So they've actually created one that works on weasels and ferrets. So it would probably affect humans as well. And they have censored this. Mm-hmm. So the article begins with the U.S. National Science Advisory Board for Biosecurity announced last week that recent discoveries regarding the H5N1 influenza or bird flu were so dangerous that research details should be censored. Ordinary H5N1 kills 60% of people infected, but is not transmittable among humans. Scientists in the Netherlands and the U.S., however, have created a strain of H5N1 that is easily transmittable among ferrets and just as deadly as ordinary H5N1. So they tweaked it.
Okay.
So it works on ferrets.
What are they actually saying should be censored?
The board has recommended that the description of the materials and methods used to create this superbug should be omitted from articles reporting these ferret flu findings in science magazines.
So they're saying you should not give the instruction on how to make the bird flu that affects and is easily transmitted to mammals. You should not give the recipe to the general public.
Yes.
Okay.
But they've officially censored it. And here's my problem.
Okay.
Generally speaking, they don't put the recipe in for what they do. That's just not the way it goes. It's usually in science journals of one variety or another. But real science journals, not, your Scientific Americans or your Discover magazines.
Right, there's not back page recipe. How to make Ebola.
Right. Yes, Discover magazine, how to make Ebola.
Using common household ingredients.
First you need Ebola.
Yeah, step one.
The problem is this sets a precedent. And you're Captain Science, man. I want to ask you, what do you think this precedent means? That they're officially censoring it. They're now putting a precedent that they can technically, officially censor this sort of material from the general populace.
Well, it concerns me because who is going to have the authority to do this censoring? I mean, are they going to be scientists? Are they going to be scientists who are specific experts in this specific area of study? I mean, science functions on this idea of peer review. Mm-hmm. And if you're censoring information, you're not making that information available to the general scientific population. How could this ever be affirmed? How could it ever be studied properly?
Well, not only that, how can we ever determine whether or not it should have been censored?
Yes.
If you have a small cabal of people deciding what sort of information again, gets censored, how do we know what they're censoring?
Yeah, and what is the power of the censoring? I mean, so ultimately somebody, regardless of it being censored, somebody's going to have access to the information. There would be a reason for somebody to have access to the information. They're censoring it. They're not completely deleting the information.
Right.
Now, but who determines the appropriateness of your request for that information. So, say I'm working in a laboratory doing some sort of, biochemical experiment. And the information as to how they came up with this thing that they censored would be useful to my research. Well, what sort of hoops do I have to jump through in order to get that information? What sort of proof do I have to put forward to say that I'm using it for a legitimate scientific purpose?
Are you from a competing organization?
Yep. That's
Am
the
I
thing.
censoring it from competition? That's my question. Because this has a wide breadth for abuse.
It really does. And that is the case whenever you're holding back the information, whenever you're censoring stuff like that. You can't know the why. That if we're refusing to tell you the information, then you can't make a determination as to whether or not the information was beneficial or useful in the first place.
Well, here's my question. If the U.S. National Science Advisory Board for Biosecurity, if they decide to censor certain things so that we have a vaccine for the
H5N1.
H5N1, what about China? Can we then create a superbug that only works on the Chinese? Is there a military application for that?
Yeah, see, that calls further into like eminent domain questions, into military applications.
Most science gets funded from the government. They get government funding. So the science advisory boards are wide open for a little nudge for who gets nominated, who gets in there. It doesn't take long, 5 years, 10 years, and you could take over a board. You've got the money. Everybody wants to make you happy because they want the grant. Everybody wants a grant.
Right, because that's the entire purpose of science, just getting the next grant and doing the next research project. That's it.
So, truth be told, that leaves itself wide open for, again, this is my big problem with this, military application.
Yeah.
Because this one specifically is about a very contagious flu, which kills, 60% of people? 50% of people that are exposed get infected, and it kills 60% of that. So that's a lot of people. That's a tremendously powerful weapon if you choose to use it that way.
Now, military research is already they are not allowed to publish. It is classified information. So if you were to create a strain of superbug in a military research laboratory in the attempt to weaponize it, they wouldn't be allowed to publish. Those rules have already been set up. But it sounds like what they're talking about here is taking this idea of eminent domain, just taking non-military research is being done and going, oh, that has a military application, we're sealing that.
Well, maybe it has a military application, or maybe it could have a terrorist application.
Sure.
Now, the line between military application and terrorist application, that's non-existent.
It depends on which side of the gun you're on.
It really does. So you can easily say, well, this can clearly be used for terrorist purposes.
Right.
So we're going to keep it hidden. We're going to create a vaccine just in case, it does happen to us. We're going to do research on this. And if it happens to get out in a country that we hate, we can quickly and fairly easily immunize our population.
Right.
And they can't. I mean, the fact of the matter is, I don't know, and it doesn't seem like they know who's drawing the lines.
And okay, so this is there's a clear-cut example here with the H5N1. We're talking about a virus which has a very significant lethality. Just as an example that maybe isn't so clear, in the research I was doing into catalytic asymmetry and installation of chiral centers in molecules, one of the byproducts of one of the reactions I developed was hydrogen cyanide. It's a common laboratory gas. Hydrogen cyanide is used all the time, but I created a new reaction that one of the byproducts was hydrogen cyanide. I got my product out the other end, or my intermediate out the other end, and there was some gas that, you had to get rid of, because hydrogen cyanide, not very good for you.
Right, so you don't want it, but, you've got this lethal stuff, and
And its lethality is far greater than 50% of 60%.
Yes.
Let's just say that. So, you can't draw a clear line to say the H5N1 information should be kept classified, but my reaction should not be. By every metric, it's lethal, just like the other one is. It has the possibility of spreading over a large population. It's an airborne gas. So who makes that decision? Where does that line come from? Because my reaction was lethal. It really was. And, the only group of people who would know for certain the specific applications of what I was doing because of the way science works were the people in my laboratory who were intimately familiar with the exact reaction I was trying to accomplish. So some external board, they would not have enough information in order to make a determination as to whether or not the reaction was valid, whether it should be something that should be allowed to be published. There's no way to do this and still make science function.
Right, peer review. You need lots of peers to review it. Otherwise, you've handicapped the greatest advantage, the big difference between science and religion.
Right. And
you can't just say things. You need to be able to support it, and people need to be able to test it.
And I for one, I've always held the position of more information is better. We should be allowed to have all the information. The information is currently available on how to, for example, make a nuclear bomb. We have that information. Are there pieces of information that are missing? Yes and no. You can actually get all the pieces of information. If you dig hard enough, you can probably find a way, at least to make a low-yield weapon. And I don't think this information should be kept from the public. I also don't think the public should be making nuclear bombs, but that's a different thing.
My problem is that it's like they're trying to legislate out the Kaczynski factor.
Right.
I mean, you get one guy that goes to school for 15 years or 20 years or whatever it is, and, develops a gripe or develops a psychological disorder or just says, screw you bastards.
Yep.
He's got the training. He's got the credentials. You probably wouldn't, without any credentials, you probably wouldn't know to do this anyway. So you need somebody with some credentials, some history to be able to even consider creating the superbug.
Yes, and are those credentials going to allow the person to bypass the classified firewall on the information and allow them to get it anyway?
Yep, and that's my problem. You can't get rid of the Kaczynski factor. It's simple as that.
And it's another example of trying to hit things with a hammer. This is not the best way. I understand there's a concern. There's a methodology to create something which could have a huge effect on the world's population, but not the way to do it. This is not the way to do it. It's I guess that's kind of the theme for this show here is these are issues that things do need to be fixed, but this is not the way to do it.
Yep. All right, now Paul, do we have a call?
We actually do not.
Okay.
So we're still waiting if anyone wants to call in about SOPA, censorship, stuff like that. Still looking for a little yellow symbol there. So anyone who calls in. Meanwhile, I'm going to just kind of move on and talk about something that's actually I stand corrected. Mm-hmm. We do have a call. It's from our friend Paul. So he was the one who first off was criticizing me in my explanation of GPS. So I'm going to give him a little crap over that. I still got him on hold, so he can't respond.
Neener.
Yeah,
yes.
Take that, Paul. What are you going to do? What are you going to do?
Yes.
All right.
Paul versus Paul. Epic conflict.
Am I on the line now? Or
yes, you are. You are on the line now, Paul. How you doing?
Not too bad, Paul. All right. My thing I already posted up there. I wasn't sure if you read there on the chat. Was about SOPA. Josh, you read the entire 70-something page bill.
Oh my God, it was horrible. Yes.
I was curious as to some of the details as far as what they were able to shut down. Was it specifically just websites, IP addresses, URLs? I mean, is it that sort of thing? Or I'm not sure how much our audience knows about internet traffic and how information moves across it, but every IP packet that goes out, it has an address it has to go to, but it also has a port, and the port tells it, the computer, once it reaches its destination, what it was for. So is it an email packet? Is it a World Wide Web search? Is it an FTP? All of those all have port numbers. One of the kind of more important port numbers that, I might maybe use, this isn't like, no one listens to this podcast, do they?
No.
Is things like, file sharing via things like torrent.
Mm-hmm.
Well, torrent, file sharing and everything that works on a specific port number.
Right.
And it's possible to do port forwarding and get onto different ports too, but I was wondering, You mentioned shutting down Pirate Bay. Like, Pirate Bay is a website which leads you to torrents. That's all it does. Just
right.
doesn't have any torrents.
Paul,
Leads you to them.
the answer to your question, they're basically in all 78 pages, to my understanding, and Josh is the one who went through it with the fine-tooth comb, but you're not going to get an answer to your question. There's no differentiation between ports, URLs. They don't know what the hell they're talking about.
They're legislators. They're a bunch of, they're a bunch of 50 to 70-year-old men that don't know what these things are. So yes, domain name specific addresses, URLs, IP addresses, all these things are fair game. Entire web servers are fair game.
Yeah.
But the ports, that wasn't addressed. So
I think
yes,
that's
no.
I mean, because it would be possible to tell like a big ISP like Time Warner to not forward through anything that's on these specific ports because it's being used to transfer copyrighted material. And, I'd be really sad.
Well, you think, this is the flip that's happened with the internet is really interesting. This thing that happened is the general public has a far greater amount of information and knowledge about the things you're talking about than the people who are trying to legislate this. This has been the case more or less all throughout history, but I don't think the gap has ever been as wide as it is currently. The kids at home with the Cheetos in front of their computers with the Starbucks coffee are the ones who know about, how to reroute, get around, ping things off a different server and, cover your tracks and do the whole things. And the people in Congress are basically just saying, corporations are losing money and they're losing money through this thing called the intronets, this series of tubes. And we need to keep that from happening because they're losing money. And I think what they intend to do is to form some sort of legislating or regulating body that may have the information or maybe able to learn the information as to how to do this. But currently, they don't know anything.
Well, my big problem with it is that requests for a court order, requests for review will shut it down.
Yeah.
The thing about that is the people that will be able to tell what you're talking about, that will have all the answers, are going to be hired by the company that wants to restrict it. So they will have the appropriate people, and they will have a ton of money to hire and find the appropriate people that will be able to figure that out. And if it's not specifically, and it's not, or explicitly written into the regulation, it will be tried. Someone will try to do it. And at that point, we'll find out whether or not it's possible, because some judge will have to have experts come in and explain it to him. But that's going to be something that's going to be tried. I mean, it has to be. They hire the best and the brightest to pull off their shenanigans, same as the hackers. The hackers are just corporate hatchet men that can't hold down a 9-to-5.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the same group of people. It's a group of young, really bright people that have found ways to twist and distort this new system. And that's what it's going to be.
And I'm fairly certain that one of the things that's going to happen is, given the average hacker's ability to disguise ISP addresses, URL addresses, and do that whole thing, I think what you're going to find is a lot of copyrighted material mysteriously appearing in places of like Pfizer's websites.
Yeah.
I think, that's probably going to be the even distribution and dissemination of copyrighted materials is going to make the idea of shutting down specific websites unusual, like in the aspect of cruel and unusual punishment. Like, well, if you can't be biased and say that Pirate Bay has to shut down when AOL, does AOL even exist anymore? When AOL has copyrighted materials up there. Well, they didn't put them up there. Somebody did, because it's just flooded with it. And the loose organizations of those internet peoples have the ability to do these things. So it's going to be an interesting cat and mouse game if this ever really gets any teeth. It's going to be an interesting cat and mouse game that I think ultimately the government is going to, unless they change their method, they're going to lose on this one, because they're not going to be able to keep up with the average citizen's ability to manipulate the data.
or they're going to have a heck of a hard time restricting their own data.
Yeah.
Because if a government entity has the power to do any real investigation into ducking, hiding, changing, or masking IP addresses, that sort of thing, that has some real counter espionage ramifications as well. That to some degree a threat to the government itself, not just ours but others, and there will probably be repercussions for that as well. People use the internet to hide a lot of data.
Yep.
So that's another issue.
And someone in the chat room just commented, if it ever does, get teeth and start moving forward, the internet is to some extent going to become a war zone. So it should be interesting. So we'll see what happens. All right, but specifically,
I do think it's scary, how loosely this is written, and you already compared it to a Patriot Act, and I think those types of laws just should frighten anybody who thinks that civil liberties are a good idea.
Yeah. Yep. And what's interesting about that, just as one last quick thing here, is we complained about the Patriot Act because we had access to it and we read it because the information was available to us. We're complaining about SOPA because the information is available to us. Laws have been ambiguous like this for hundreds and hundreds of years. They're always written this way. It's just now that we're starting to realize, hey, we can go and look at what they're actually talking about in Congress, and we look at it and we go, oh my God, like that doesn't make any sense. And so this is just the further paradigm shift that we're talking about. When the general population has the information, things are different. So, but as far as SOPA goes, we'll have to see what happens.
I guess we will wait and see.
All right, Paul. Thanks for calling in and correcting me on GPS.
Anytime, buddy.
All right, I'll talk to you soon.
All right, catch you guys later.
Yep. Okay. All right. So I was going to move on to my my science you may never have heard of section, and just keeping in line with this idea of SOPA, censorship, but also just how information has changed over the recent history. I wanted to talk a little bit about MP3s and lossy compression. One of the reasons why I wanted to talk about this is because, Josh, you and I had a conversation a couple of months ago, actually, where I think you had asked the question of, well, how do MP3s work? Because we're talking about compressing the podcast down, and you're like, how do MP3s work? And I went, oh, it's simple.
Yep.
I have no idea.
Yeah, that's the problem with a lot of information. We think it's in our heads until we actually have to produce it, and then you realize, oh, I actually don't know that.
Yeah. So, but a little bit of research actually allowed me to collect the information here. So, just kind of tying this back to SOPA, one of some of the largest groups behind the attempt to implement SOPA are the motion picture industry and the recording industry. Both these groups have been screwed by the easy availability of data. Okay, so no single invention has probably hurt the recording industry more than the invention of the MP3 file format. MP3s are, what's on our iPods now, what's on our phones or our MP3 players, whatever it is. It is this brilliant way to store music or audio in general in a way where it takes up a very, very small amount of size. So it allows a huge pile of data to be reduced to a much smaller and much more manageable pile of data. The amount of information that is actually recorded when you record a piece of music is gigantic. It's huge, and we're going to kind of go into that. So if we look at the recording of music in general, all the way back when, we start off with analog recording, we start off with records, we start off with Edison, who the phonograph was invented in 1877 by that bastard Edison. A simple explanation of how it worked. So sound would either vibrate either a membrane or simply a metal cone. Think about that RCA, the little puppy with the phonograph, that cone. That metal cone would vibrate, have a tiny little needle attached to it. And the needle would scratch grooves into the first invention. It was a rotating drum made of wax. And the needle would vibrate back and forth just as the cone vibrated because you were shaking it with the actual sound waves. And that needle would carve kind of grooves into that wax cylinder. And then they moved on to tinfoil cylinders, and that kind of evolved over time. But so say you had a sound of 4,000 hertz, just a nice middle of the road sound. The needle would scratch the actual shape of the vibrating microphone thing into the cylinder. The microphone vibrates because the sound waves are hitting it, moves back and forth, and the needle is actually scratching that right into it. Playback was simply putting the needle into that groove, and the needle would then vibrate, causing the cone to vibrate. You get the sound back out.
Right, fairly simple.
Yeah. So this is completely analog. It was simply the shape of the groove, the depth of the groove, and the speed at which the cylinder was rotated that recreated the sound. In the 100 years after Edison's invention, the tools in order to accomplish this got better, but the underlying principle really stayed the same. Modern-ish records do the same thing. There's still that analog, there's still a groove, vibrates a needle, does the whole thing.
Yeah, it's exactly the same thing. I mean, it's just smaller.
And cassette tapes did the same thing as well. The only difference with cassette tapes is instead of a wax cylinder, it was an electromagnet and a magnetic head, but it was still basically carving grooves of polarity. They would change the polarity. So you have a tape that has little magnets on it, all pointing in one direction. Mm-hmm. And when you send a signal into it, it would point little pieces of the magnet in another direction. And that's how you get your grooves and your little troughs and vibrations.
So basically the exact same thing. A little more sophisticated, but the same thing. Yeah.
Right. So it was still analog, still did the same thing. But along comes digital. So in 1970, James Russell patented the first digital-to-optical recording and playback system. This is eventually what would become the compact disc. The idea with digital is that instead of carving a groove in the actual shape that the speaker is vibrating, the speaker vibration would be translated into a series of numbers. Usually just 1 and 0. Mm-hmm. Is yes or no.
Right.
And this would be reassembled to create the actual analog signal later. So this actually requires much more information. Okay, it requires about 1 billion times more information because instead of just simply carving the wave shape, the non-compressed digital signal it looks at every frequency, usually in the range of human hearing from about 200 hertz to about 20,000 hertz, and asks for each frequency: is there a tone there? Yes or no? And a 1 if there is a tone, a 0 if there is not a tone. Okay, and
this all seems fairly simple.
And it does that for snapshots of time. And for CDs, for example, the snapshot is 1/44,000th of a second. Mm-hmm. So if you have 1 second worth of music, it's divided up into 44,000 pieces. And in each piece, you have a map of
every sound that you could possibly have.
Right.
And there's a marker for where there is that sound.
Exactly. So, is there a tone at 500 hertz? Yes. Okay, mark that as 1. Is there a tone at 501 hertz? No, mark that as 0. So you have a data point for each frequency for that slice of time, and you wind up with a very, very, very long number. And that's just for 1/44,000th of a second. Mm-hmm. Okay, so the benefit of this incredibly data-intensive system is that there's no degradation in quality. Once you convert it to numbers, it's simply a set of instructions. As long as the numbers don't change, you will have perfect reproduction at the other end. You could take a piece of music, convert it to digital, you could look at the number, write it down in a book, bury it underground for 50 years, dig it back up, type those numbers back into a computer, and the song would sound exactly the same.
Although that typing would take quite a while.
It would take quite a while. But it's kind of this thing that I've always thought about with books. I always think about you could take an entire pot of coffee and dump it on your hardcover first edition of Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire. Mm-hmm. And when you read it, so long as you can read the words, you're still going to get the exact same story.
That's right.
It doesn't matter if the book's frayed, if the pages are torn, as long as the information is there, you're going to get the exact same story. Even if it smells like coffee when you're reading it. So with digital came CDs. CDs are non-lossy. That means that all the information that is recorded is being presented to you. Anything coming from the audio source, whether that voice, guitar, etc., is converted to numbers. Nothing's thrown away. In order to do this, the music is sampled 44,000 times per second. Samples are 2 bytes or 16 bits long, separate channels for the right and left. So it works out to 1.4 million bytes per second.
Ooh, yeah. Now that's a lot of typing, isn't it?
For an average song length of about 3 minutes, that's about 32 million bytes or 32 megabytes of information. It's a huge amount of data. So the podcast, for example, just talking about this, it was first recorded in WAV format. It's what we're recording it in now at that 44,000 bytes per second rate. Usually when we're done with our show, which is 45 minutes to an hour, the size is about 1.4 gigabytes. And it's huge. All the data is there. The ones to indicate that there is sound at a specific point, the zeros to indicate that there is no sound. So pretty much since the advent of digital recording, groups have been working on trying to reduce this down, to throw away extraneous information. And the MP3 format is this idea of lossy compression. You lose some of the information, but the file size is greatly reduced. This went public in 1994. It was the first widely distributed, commercially available lossy compression format. MP3s can reduce the amount of data by a factor of 10 to 14 times.
Let me ask you, how do they compress it? I mean, because my guess right off the top is they created a small formula that says how many zeros there are.
No, actually, we're gonna talk about exactly how it does it, and it's actually a bit smarter than that.
All right. Oh, excuse me.
Yep, I'm calling you stupid.
I'm stupid. I'm not Captain Techno guy.
Okay, so the podcast, for example, when you compress down to an MP3, we go from 1.4 gigs to about 20 to 40 megabytes. And just as an aside note, yeah, shut up, Paul. I know digital audio tapes preceded CDs. They're the same format. Shut up. Okay. Hi, Paul. Anyway, how they do this, how they reduce the amount of data is they lose sound quality in kind of a very smart way. Okay, so CDs in the WAV format make no value judgment about the importance of any particular data point. MP3s use an algorithm to get rid of data based upon a huge set of rules. Rules such as there are certain sounds that the human ear cannot hear. Gets rid of those.
Right.
There are certain sounds that the human ear hears much better than others. Gets rid of the ones that, the human ear can't hear quite as well. And if there are two sounds playing simultaneously, we hear the louder one, but we cannot hear the softer one. So MP3s use, and this is 3 of hundreds and hundreds of rules that are set up, which allow data to be tossed out the window. Now, it's not 100% faithful, hence the lossy format. The best kind of metaphor I can come up with this is, as I was thinking about this, is digital pictures. Okay, so if you look at a painting that an artist has done, and it's a painting of something, there's a red group of flowers or whatnot, and it's smooth. They used paint, they blended, they did a whole thing, and there's various shades of red and things. If you take that picture, if you take that painting, and you take a digital picture of it, what it does is it puts it. If you look at the picture far enough away, it looks like a very, very faithful and accurate reproduction, right? What happens is if you put that in your computer or something like that and you zoom in, you get really, really close, you realize that instead of a smooth transition of color in the red section, for example, I'm talking about, you get boxes, little pixels. And that box is red. And the box next to it is slightly darker red. Now, in the actual painting, what you had was, maybe 30,000 different specific, if you're looking at color as the speed of photons or the wave function of photons, right, for example, there's 30,000 different energy levels coming off, but you reduce it down to a red square and a slightly darker red square and a slightly darker red scale. And you can't tell that unless you zoom in really, really close on the picture. That's kind of the same thing that MP3s do. They create boxes. They eliminate the subtle variations because you're not looking that close. You're not looking that intently on it. And the quality of MP3s is directly related to the size of the boxes. So you can reduce down the amount of information in an MP3 from a WAV format. You can reduce it down to a huge, huge amount, and it sounds very much like AM radio. It sounds bad. It sounds tinny, and that's right, because, in essence, the boxes that I'm talking about are huge. You can do it very, very high quality, very, very small boxes. Boxes are still there. It's still kind of pixelated, as it were, but it's you can't detect it as well. So that's basically what the MP3s do, is they throw out extraneous data. They throw out data that is buried behind other data. So if you have a very loud sound at 4,000 hertz and a somewhat softer sound at 3,000 hertz, you're able to chuck the 3,000 hertz sound, and you won't really be able to perceive a difference. So
right, because you wouldn't have been able to perceive that to begin with.
Right, but the complete non-lossy format reproduces that because it's stupid. It reproduces everything. It just does what it's told to do. It reproduces every sound. The MP3 format, the algorithm is a little bit smarter, and it bins a lot of that stuff. And then on top of it, it does reduce down, like, if you have five slivers of sound, and one of them is 5,000 hertz, one of them's 5,001 hertz, one of them's 4,999 hertz. The MP3 just goes 5,000 hertz. Call that one number. Call that one box 5,000 hertz. It kind of softens it. It puts it into that box.
It just cheats,
basically.
And the whole thing here sounds like it's just cheating. It's using approximations,
right? And they're
very, very small approximations. These pixels, so to speak, but they're just approximations.
Right. And for the most part, we're pretty comfortable with that because we can't. Now there's the wacky nutjob audiophiles that want to buy the $80,000 record players out there. I'm not talking about those people. But
nice tone, those people.
I've heard them. And granted, I don't have perfect hearing. I can't tell a difference. I certainly can't tell a difference that would make me want to spend $80,000 on a record player.
Do you have $80,000 to spare?
I do not.
Well, that may also be part of it.
Seriously, have you ever been in a room with these?
I have not.
Okay, yeah, it's.
I know nothing of this. It seems absolutely absurd to me. But devil's advocate. My question is, if you had the $80,000 to spare, literally to spare,
I don't know. I just don't know. Okay, but so that's basically how MP3s kind of, chuck out some of the unimportant and then less important data for not a completely accurate, not a completely faithful sound reproduction, but good enough. Good enough given the limits of our headphones or our speakers.
That's actually a good point. They can't actually perform as well.
Right. The non-lossy format, the non-compressed deal, that information is being lost anyway because your speakers cannot faithfully reproduce with 100% accuracy the information there anyway. So, but this method of compression is it made MP3s, which along with similar methods for pictures, for videos, basically is how the internet is currently able to function. We've been able to shrink the amount of data to an amazing extent, and we've gotten better at transmitting that data. And because of that, we have things like YouTube, we have things like Pandora, Hulu, Netflix, iTunes. All of these are possible because data compression. We've gotten to the point where on-demand viewing and listening is an option. We couldn't do this when it would take, if listening to a 3-minute piece of music was a 20-minute download, which it was, way back when the intronets started. This whole on-demand idea just wouldn't work. So these compression formats are very important for our interneting experience. So the problem comes in, and this is where SOPA and censorship comes in and whatnot, is record companies and the like, the ease of data sharing allows people to circumvent the purchasing of the data from the source. If there's no loss of quality, then I can copy and distribute an album or a movie 100 times, even 1 billion times, and everyone gets the exact same thing. Because remember, it's just that number. It's just that, so long as the number matches, it's an exact reproduction of what I have. Even if it's compressed, if I give you the exact same file, it sounds exactly the same. So copyright laws were put into place long before the data was communicated in this way. The old model doesn't really seem to fit the current needs. I want to state here for the record, I have never illegally downloaded anything ever.
I can attest to that.
Yeah. That's Josh and I, nope, we've never ever done that.
Nope.
Okay. But I have heard of people doing such a thing.
Surely not.
And from what I hear, it's probably done more often because that person wants that album or movie right now, as opposed to, waiting, purchasing, and doing that. I mean, sometimes it is a money issue. If you're talking about, a program that's very, very expensive, a lot of times people, I hear, will just go ahead and, I'm not going to pay, $500 for that program, I'll steal it. But other times it's like, oh, I want to hear that song right now. And so this is kind of the thing that the SOPA is not going to correct, and this would be this problem. We want the information, we want it now. These formats have allowed us.
Yeah, we've developed a very short attention span, and actually,
Right.
that is a fairly smart idea. One of the ways you can eliminate that is charge for individual downloads, but make everything available for download.
Yes.
Because there's so many restrictions and so many things I can't download. I get very annoyed by the fact that I can't get it. I can't properly review it to find out if I actually do want it. So some sort of thing where I can get a trial run of something.
Sure.
Then I won't maybe steal it. Maybe then I'll put the $10, the $22 or whatever it is to download this book, this program, this whatever it is. I may actually pay for it if you can show me it's good.
Exactly.
But there's no way for me to try something like that to find out if it's, user friendly, if it's intuitive for me, if I like it, if I just don't like the picture that comes up that holds the information. I mean, just not like that. And I don't know that without having a chance to try it.
Yep.
So cheap trial runs might be a way to save the internet. I think maybe you just saved the internet.
I'm a hero.
You are Captain Amazing.
Captain Amazing, Captain Science, and a hero. So, at the end of the day, with all of these ways to compress data, what we've been doing with all of this is simply figuring out a way to determine what's important and what's less important. We were able to make the music file smaller, we were able to make the video file smaller by saying that's not as important, because the human brain is an amazing thing. The human brain cheats. If you ever look at CAPTCHA, we were talking about CAPTCHA the other week.
Yep.
The human brain is able to cheat and go, that's a T or that's an H or whatever, even though all the information isn't necessarily there.
And sometimes there's a lot of superfluous information we filter out to say, nope, that's a T, even though it's got the extra wavy line and the twistiness to it. We can figure that out because, the brain cheats.
Yeah, and data compression is basically the same thing. We're able to smooth over the gaps. We're able to smooth over the gaps without our, cognitive, without our aware part of our brain even realizing it. We're filling in the blanks. We're making that a song, even though there's gaps of microseconds or a sound is missing in one part. But we just build a bridge. Truth
be told, if you listen to those people that hear ghosts through the static, whatever, there's a name for that. But
idiots.
Yes. No, the thing that they're doing, not the fact that they're morons.
Idiocy.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, that's it, precisely. They hear the voice because our brains can make it into a thing, even though it's not. It's chaos. But our brains can hear enough things that sound sort of like something we know, and we put it in the box. Because our brains can do that. Our brains can cheat tremendously.
Absolutely. And that's what we've utilized in order to have this wealth of information that we have now.
Right. Perfection is not right, because we're not perfect. So if you don't make things perfect, it's good enough because we can't hear it perfect anyway.
Absolutely.
We have imperfect speakers, imperfect headphones, imperfect brains. We're not paying enough attention. I'm sure that the audiophiles probably do hear a difference. They probably also are focusing on it really, really intently.
Yes.
If you spend that much time focusing on what's in your iPod, you've done something wrong with your life.
Yes, that is.
Is it electronic voice something? Somebody in the chat room
EVP,
just said EVP.
Electronic voice phenomena.
Phenomenon, thank you. Electronic voice phenomena. I knew it was something like that.
Yeah, that's and that is our brains working overtime and filling things into boxes that the boxes don't necessarily exist for. But yes, that's a very brief explanation of how MP3s are able to chuck out a lot of that data, and that's what has made the internet the internet. That and Al Gore.
So, Al Gore, of course. He's the one that originally got the series of small tubes together.
Yeah.
That we could use for the internet.
Well, he was a tube collector.
Oh, that's what I hear. Al Gore, tube collector.
Like Johnny Appleseed, except with tubes, and he collected
Johnny Appleseed dispersed them.
That's why he said with tubes and collecting. I know what I'm doing.
So it's the opposite. He's like the opposite of Johnny Appleseeds, except with something totally different.
Yes,
exactly. Okay, good deal. As long as we're on the same page.
Okay. All right, well, moving on to You're Wrong, and let me tell you why. This week, Josh and I decided that we are going to have a discussion about the separation of church and state.
Was it Mr. Newt Gingrich that inspired this?
Yes, Mr. Newt Gingrich.
Newt.
This was something that I actually came across. Newt Gingrich, his campaign published a memo, basically, that said that he was going to form a commission his first day as president of the United States. I guess he's making the assumption that he's going to win the election.
He is Newt.
He's going to put together a commission to basically get rid of the separation of church and state. And the reason why he says he wants to form this commission to get rid of the separation of church and state is that the founding fathers' ideas in separating the church from the state have been wildly misrepresented. Those ideas being, according to Newt Gingrich's memo, that the separation of church and state, the intention was to keep churches protected from government influence. So, that being said, today's topic is the Founding Fathers' intent with the separation of church and state was to keep churches safe from government influence. Yes or no? So, all right, Josh, you have a coin over there?
I do indeed.
All right.
Here we go.
Why don't you...
All right. Well, you should call it before I look at it.
Yeah. You take the coin. Heads is the affirmative here.
Heads is that the Founding Fathers' intent was to keep churches safe from government influence.
Yes.
Okay, and that's the affirmative, and I'm taking the coin.
Yep.
Okay. And it is, hold on. All right, it is the negative.
All right.
And I am taking the coin, so I'm saying that was not their intent.
Right.
Okay.
I am saying clearly that the Founding Fathers' intent was, with the separation of church and state, was to keep churches safe from government influence. Now, this... I don't think that there's even a discussion here. This couldn't be more clear. What we're talking about is a country founded on the idea of religious freedom. And there not being a state-sponsored religion like there was in England, and the idea that churches should be free to do whatever it is they want or need to do without the harm of government influence, without a government controlling and regulating body overstepping its bounds, telling the church that it must do this, do that, worship this God, do whatever. Clearly it was, the idea was to protect churches from undue influence and allow them to worship in their own way.
Okay, first off, let's look at the text initially.
Oh, look at the text, because I got a computer I can use.
Yes, indeed. I can pull it right up. So the First Amendment to the Constitution has the two clauses here. It is the Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof.
There you go. That makes my point.
It really does. It seems to make your point that Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to have to say I think you won this one.
Okay.
Hands down, there's not a well. There may be a small problem with it.
Okay.
Or prohibiting the free exercise thereof.
All right.
That actually means that government cannot prohibit the free exercise of any religion. So in a manner of speaking, you're correct. Mm-hmm. But the problem is, for that to function, the government can't have any one religion in it dominating it.
Right.
So the government can't actually be affected by religion, or it would affect the religions themselves. So yes, you're correct that this is not the Founding Fathers' intent.
What? So hang on. So your position is that the Founding Fathers' intent with the separation of church and state was to keep the government safe from church influence.
No, I'm going to say it was both.
Okay.
That their intent included to some degree yours. So you actually are pretty right on with that one. I'm not going to argue completely. The problem is that you're missing the huge section of it, which is that to do so, clearly you need to keep the government safe from any religion. So no religion can become dominant, therefore no religion can be established.
I don't think, number one, it says that. I don't think you've substantiated that in any way.
I don't think, are you suggesting that there is another way that can happen? Are you suggesting the Founding Fathers are morons, first off?
No, I'm suggesting that if we have elected positions, we have elected offices, and let's say we vote in a bunch of Scientologists.
Sure.
Then their influence of their religion on the government doesn't have anything to do with the intention of the separation of church and state to keep the government from influencing other churches that are not Scientologists. Let me phrase that a different way. What I mean by that is, if we elect a bunch of Scientologists, then there's nothing barring us from making L. Ron Hubbard our king, besides the Constitution, but I'm not talking about the separation of church and state. The Scientologists in the government can use the government to put forth whatever religious agenda they want, whatever they need. The only thing they cannot do is to use their influences on other churches. They cannot go attack.
So they can't create any laws that would inhibit or alter in any way other religious beliefs or practices.
Right.
So they can't establish a religion, so they really can't use their religion to make any Scientology laws.
No, they absolutely...
So you're saying they can by not doing it.
They absolutely can. How would it affect Mormonism to put up a picture of L. Ron Hubbard in the Supreme Court? How could that possibly affect or influence Mormonism in any way?
Had to go with Mormonism from Scientology.
Yep.
Because I was going to go, when you were talking, I was thinking Mormonism, and you said Scientology, and I thought, ooh, that's nice. That's left field. That's a good deal. I would have gone with Jehovah's Witnesses, would have also been acceptable.
They're nice, yeah.
That would be the establishment of religion.
Right, but again, the position is the establishment of religion isn't an issue. It's only the oppression.
Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion.
Oh, you can say those words.
I can. That would be the establishment of religion. So that would be Congress making a congressional mandate to do so, and a congressional mandate has the full force of law. It is a law, therefore would be Congress establishing a
Congress
religion.
Shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion.
Yes.
Meaning that Congress cannot specifically create a religion. However, if members of Congress are all of a particular religious persuasion, i.e. Scientologists, they're not making a law respecting the establishment of religion. All they're doing is putting forth the agenda as the elected representatives of the population that voted them into office. So
A religious agenda, which would be in full force establishing a religion.
I know. I think you're making a bit of a leap there.
So we're going to have a law that says nobody can eat pork. You have to pray 5 times a day. Always to the east or the west, depending if you're California. In California, I think you should pray to the west, but nobody's on board with me on that one.
That does actually make more sense.
I mean, seriously.
I will concede that point.
Okay, thank you. Women have to wear burqas. You can behead people for this, that, or the other thing, but we are not establishing Islam as the religion.
Well, no. See,
because that would be establishing Islam as the religion.
No, see, you're making an assumption, and it's incorrect. I'm not saying that they could establish a law that says that all women must wear burqas, because that would clearly violate any other religion. It would oppress any other religion. What I'm saying
What sort of law could they put forth?
All Supreme Court justice women must wear burqas. So long as they are the majority religious population elected by the public, then they are able to put forth without violating the separation of church and state as it's laid out according to Newt Gingrich's interpretation and the Constitution.
They would be outlawing certain people to become part of the Supreme Court.
No, they wouldn't. Because,
yes, they would.
Because
those people would then have to be part of that religion or act as if they were part of that religion.
Who affirms Supreme Court justices? That would be the Congress of the United States, correct?
Affirms? Yes. Okay, sure.
Now, those are elected representatives.
Yes.
So if they wanted a Mormon Supreme Court justice, then they should have voted for representatives that would have considered a Mormon Supreme Court justice. But since they didn't, since they are all Scientologists, then clearly that's the will of the people, and that's democracy in action.
I do have to say today, Paul, good show, sir. Good show. Good show. Yes, and if the majority of people put forth that black people should be considered property, it's not that we're making slavery legal. It's just the majority of people are suggesting that black people should be considered property.
Well,
that's totally different.
It makes me. Why are you against democracy?
It doesn't have the word slavery in it at all.
You're putting forth this agenda that is something other than you're like a communist here. I mean, it's the will.
I hate having the reasonable position. It always
it's the will of the people. Okay, if the people want it to happen, we have a representative democracy. We vote for a person who's going to represent our interests. Our interests being, we want all Supreme Court justices to wear burqas, male and female.
All right, you've been having fun so far with this. I'm going to have my fun.
All right.
Just like Adolf Hitler.
That's what you're going to do.
Adolf Hitler was elected. The majority of the people that voted in that election wanted him to be both chancellor and head of state. Therefore, well, he was actually appointed. That's besides the point. So therefore, Germany was pro-Hitler, and every single German wanted that because they were a representative democracy.
Yes.
So under that one, I had to had to have a good time and have my own reducto ad Hitlerum.
Well, yeah, sometimes you gotta.
Well, I've been stuck with the reasonable position for quite a while. It's been causing me grief.
So there is some actual question as to whether or not we're still recording or live streaming to the internet. That's
okay.
That's an interesting one. Do you have a time on your studio there?
21:43 left.
Okay, so my computer's just frozen. That's fine. All right. So apparently everyone else is listening as we're just babbling on. Sorry about that. So here's the thing: you make the argument that, you want to jump immediately reduction to Hitler. You want to say, Hitler was an elected official. And the only argument you could possibly be putting forth with that is to say that you are against democracy. You are in fact making the argument that democracy is bad, it leads to Hitler.
I would actually make the argument that the 10 amendments to the Constitution are actually anti-democracy. because they do specify certain specific rights which cannot be overruled. Mm-hmm. And that's exactly what they do. Is the Founding Fathers saw a flaw in democracy. Mob rule, not a good plan. So they said, you can do whatever you want. It's really hard to get rid of these rules. We'll put some rules in stone. We'll put some legislation before there's even a legislative body out there in stone so that you cannot even begin to mess with these. I mean, you can get rid of the First Amendment. That's doable. It's just very difficult.
Okay, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems to me, in my interpretation of what you're saying, that you are calling the Founding Fathers fascist communists.
Well, no, not fascist. I would say, federalist, social democrats practicing within a Republican schema.
Are you saying that the Founding Fathers were born in Uganda? Is that what you're saying?
I do not believe Uganda existed at the time they were born, so I'm saying that is an impossibility. So I'm saying you, sir, are reducting to the absurd.
I am not.
Reducto ad absurdum.
I'm clearly just stating your argument in a way that the common man could understand it. You and your fancy talk, and I'm saying...
You and your paper tigers can kiss my behind. Your argument is that we should make everyone in this country a Scientologist.
That is my argument.
And I find it shocking and offensive, and L. Ron Hubbard would turn over in his grave if he were in a grave and not in a starship in the middle of the Sirius.
Let me clarify. My position is not that we should make everyone a Scientologist. My position is only that we should make everyone a Scientologist who is not already a member of some other church which would preclude them from being Scientologists, because we can't influence that church. But if they're atheists, they should all be Scientologists.
Well, this is a reasonable point. This is actually quite a reasonable point.
All right.
All right.
Well, we want to know what you think. Email us at reason@wnyatheist.org. All right. So we have some random amount of time left as my computer is completely frozen here. But
okay.
What are you going to do? First of the year, first of a whole new set of technical problems. But
yes, indeed.
We're getting better in some areas. We're getting worse in others.
Well, that's how it always works.
Yeah.
Today, in closing, I would like to put forth a quote here by a personal hero of mine.
Okay.
Mr. George Carlin. Inside every cynical person, there is a disappointed idealist.
I would agree with that quote.
Well, as would George Carlin.
Yeah, well, if he were still alive. Mm-hmm. All right, well, thanks for staying with us to the bottom of about an hour and 45 minutes, I'm just going to guess.
Sure.
Of Reason Podcast. So next week we're going to be talking about Buddhism. We're going to take
Buddhism.
A little bit of a different...
Taking a journey east.
Yeah, taking a bit of a journey east.
We're going to find ourselves a seemingly anorexic guy sitting under a bodhi tree, and we're going to grill him.
And one of the things that Josh and I talked about in coming up with this topic was Buddhism is a very, well, at least it used to be. Certainly when I was in my early adult years, a very kind of popular religion.
It's very trendy. Very trendy.
Yeah, like it's very, very, I'm a Buddhist. I don't believe in any of that batshit crazy stuff.
Right.
But I'm a Buddhist. So we're going to talk about Buddhism and see exactly how batshit crazy it is or is not.
Yeah, it'll be a good time.
All right. So until next Sunday, we will you will have a good week. I mandate it. You must have a good week, and farewell.
Well, you've mandated. Have a nice one.